Myself, Mukti Jadhav. I'm Assistant Professor at Gandhinagar Institute of Pharmacy, Gandhinagar University Department of Pharmacology. Today we will learn cellular level of organization. So when we start cellular level of organization, first we need to learn about cell. What is cell? Cell is a structural and functional unit of the living organism. A cell junction is also known as cell communication, or we can say cell signaling also. So, cell communication is crucial for coordinating various activities within multicellular organism. It involves the transmission of signals between cells, which can occur through direct physical contact or through the release of signaling molecules. Here, an overview of these cell junctions. Cell junctions are specialized structures that physically connect adjacent cells, facilitating direct cell to cell communication. There are several types of cell junctions. In that, first is tight junctions. Tight junction is this junction seal the space between adjacent cells, preventing the leakage of molecules between them and maintaining the integrity of epithelial cell layers. Second one is gap junctions. Gap junctions consist of channels formed by connexin proteins that allow small molecules and ions to pass directly from one cell to another, enabling rapid communication and coordination of cellular activities. And last is desmosomes. Desmosomes are anchoring junctions that provide mechanical strength and resilience to tissues by anchoring intermediate filaments to the cell membrane, promoting tissue integrity and stability. So, a biological mechanism that occur in cells which gives cells an ability to receive or generate the signal response environment to their surrounding. Cell to cell communication between cells is mediated by extracellular signal molecules. Some of those operate over long distances also. So there are general principles of cell signaling, and that cell signaling involves the transmission of signals from one cell to another, allowing cells to respond to change in their environment or coordinate their activities. The key principles include first is reception. Signaling molecules or ligands bind to specific receptor proteins on the surface or inside the target cell, initiating the signaling process, and then it goes into the transduction process. Once the ligand receptor complex forms, the signal is transmitted and amplified through a series of intracellular signaling cascades, often involving second messengers and protein kinases. And third is responses, when the signaling pathway ultimately leads to a cellular response, which can include changes in gene expression, alterations in cell metabolism, cytoskeletal rearrangement, or secretion of signaling molecules. Cell surface receptors relay extracellular signaling via intracellular signaling pathway. Some intracellular signaling proteins act as molecular switches. Cell surface receptors fall into three main classes. Ion channel coupled receptors convert chemical signals into electrical ones. Next, cell to cell communication. Cell communication is also known as signaling of the cells. It is very crucial role in the communications of the cell to another cell, or we can say adjacent cell. It is vital process that allows cells to communicate with each other to coordinate various activities within multicellular organism. Here are the general principles of the cell communications. There are mainly three steps which involves cellular signaling pathway. First is reception of extracellular signal by cells. Second is transduction of signal from outside of cell to inside of cell, often multi-step. Note that necessary transduction of ligand, cellular response, the response is initiated and or occurs entirely within receiving the cells. Here, there are mainly three stages which involve in the cell signaling pathways. First is reception. The process begins when a signaling molecule, which is called as ligand, that ligands bind to a specific receptors protein on the target cell surface or inside the cell. This binding triggered a conformational change in the receptor and goes into second process, that is known as transduction process. After this receptor ligand complex forms, the signal is transduced into the cell through a series of steps. These often involves a cascade of protein interactions and the generation of second messengers such as cyclic AMP, calcium ions, or inositol triphosphate, which is known as IP3, which amplify and propagate the signal and goes into the responses. Finally, the signal triggered a specific cellular response, which can include changes in gene expression, alteration in enzyme activity, cytoskeletal rearrangement, or secretion of signaling molecules among them. The response ultimately leads to a physiological effect such as cell growth, cellular metabolism, cellular differentiation, movement, or death. Then reception, the first stage involves the binding of signaling cascade, which is known as ligand molecules, to a receptor protein on the cellular surface or inside the cell. Receptors can be cell surface receptors such as G protein coupled receptor or receptor tyrosine kinases, or intracellular receptors such as nuclear receptor. After the binding with the receptor, it goes into the transduction process. Transduction process following the receptor activation, it will start. The signal is transmitted across the cell membrane and amplified through a series of intracellular signaling events. This often involves the activation of protein kinases, which which phosphorylate target proteins, leading to changes in their activity or its localization. Second, messengers and protein cascades play a crucial role in this stage. After the binding and its conformational changes, it gives the cellular responses. Once the signal has been transduced inside the cell, it elicits a specific cellular response. This can involve a wide range of cellular processes, including changes in gene expression, alteration in cell metabolism, cytoskeletal rearrangement, or secretion of molecules. The nature of the response depends on the type of signaling pathway activates and the specific cellular context. The external signals will occur in the form of electrical, physical, or chemical signaling by the radio waves. After that, it goes inside the cell, binding with receptor site means specific ligand with the receptor binding sites. It gives the transduction responses either in the form of nerve impulses or in the form of cellular signaling, and it produces the responses via contraction or secretion. Receptors types of signaling. Receptors can be defined by their location or its morphology. Based on the location, it either intracellular receptor or cell surface receptor. Intracellular receptors located within the cell, whereas cell surface receptors or membrane receptor located on the plasma membrane to bind the ligand outside the cell. There are mainly three subclasses of membrane receptors. First is channel link receptors, which associated with the ion types of channels that open in response to a ligand. Then second is enzymatic receptors, which having receptor is an enzyme that is activated by via binding with the ligand. And G protein coupled receptors, which GTP bound assist in transmitting the signal. Intracellular receptors involve steroid hormone and steroid receptors. Steroid hormones have non-polar lipid-soluble structures, means it is hydrophobic in nature. Can cross the plasma membrane. Steroid receptors having steroidal moiety, which basically affect regulation of the gene expression. An inhibitor blocks the receptor from binding to DNA until the hormone is present. Here, cell surface receptors having mainly, this figure indicates the binding of ligand with its receptor sites. After binding, the transduction process will occur. That transduction process, the inactive site will activate and gives the cellular response. Here, intracellular or nuclear receptor shows various types of hormone. That hormone crosses the plasma membrane and binds to specific receptors. That receptor activates or change the conformation of it, and it gives to the signal or response. Cellular response is either in the form of gene expression. Next is cell communications. There are mainly four stages which includes in the cellular communication. First is direct contact, paracrine and autocrine signaling, endocrine signaling, and synaptic signaling. The basic principles of cell signaling is in the four form of intracellular cell signaling. Paracrine signaling act locally over different types of the cells, while as autocrine signaling act locally over the same types of cells, including themselves. Suppose, for example, mitochondria means both mitochondria gives the signaling in the same way, that is known as autocrine signaling pathway. Endocrine signaling act over long distances. Here, the figure indicates the signaling transformations via autocrine, endocrine, paracrine, and signaling across the gap junctions. In the autocrine, the cell itself gives the signals. Or signaling across gap junctions, cell targets specific cell connect by the gap junctions. In the paracrine, it communicate nearby the cells, and in endocrine, a distant cell through bloodstream. Steps involved for cell signaling. First is synthesis of signaling molecule will occur. It gives the release various types of signaling molecules, transport to the signal to target cells, and detect or binds specific receptors. It gives the various conformational changes, and due to the changes, the receptor signal complex will give the signal.